So earlier this week, I was outside mowing the backyard as it was getting pretty gnarly out there and we need to get it done before it got worse. But we weren't dealing with a yard that had grass. No, my backyard doesn't have any grass because it's too dry. Instead, we got a horde of weeds that stretched to the skies, and cutting those damn things was actually somewhat calming. As weird as it sounds, I actually went out there and did it without being told for the most part, and it was really calming. I actually felt like I had all the time in the world, but the one thing I absolutely hated about doing it was the thick, almost tree-like weeds that you can't cut down with a weed whacker, but actually have to rip out with your hands, and the ones that I had to deal with were just awful. I don't know if there's chemicals in the rain or something, but these things felt like they were mutated by something, and that's when a thought came to mind. Now, there's a couple of Skylanders who were mutated or warped by something over the years, but the first one to come to mind for me was Tree Rex, who's obviously a tree, and that just got me thinking, are there other tree Skylanders out there besides him? So that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to hunt down as many tree-based or inspired Skylanders as we can, so without any more stalling, let's get things off to a good start and talk about the giant from earlier. Now, when it comes to a Skylander like Tree Rex, he's pretty well known throughout the history of the games themselves due to the fact that he was the starter giant. And as a Skylander, he's one of the first giants I've ever had as well. With that said, that's given me a pretty high expectation for his backstory. But before we hop into that, we need to talk about his development history as well, which is surprisingly short for one of the poster boys of the giants. All it really says is that his slam attack was inspired by the Hulk, his arm cannon was the beginning of his creation, and the creators thought his soul gem upgrade was funny. But with that out the way, let's take a look at his backstory and see what's going on here. Before the Skylanders were even a concept, a giant tree would reside in one of the many forests within Skylands, towering over the other trees and protecting many of the creatures under it with its mighty branches. All was well in the forest until the Archean Empire built a large factory at the edge of it, the Archeans unknowingly creating a threat that would go on to topple their entire empire. Magic itself would leak from the factory and into the forest, poisoning the soil over hundreds of years, and slowly but surely, the giant tree would begin to mutate. Its branches became arms, its roots a large pair of legs, and finally its trunk a body. And soon, Tree Rex would be born from the ashes of his old body. And he was pissed beyond imagination. He immediately set out towards the factory and smashed it into oblivion, and learning that the factory was placed there, he would set off to find whoever placed it there and stomp them flat as well. He would eventually join the Giants to get sent 10,000 years into the future, along with the rest of his team, and he would make an appearance in Ripped into Overdrive, Return of the Dragon King, and a comic known as the Chaos Trap, where he and two other Skylanders, Starstrike and Gilgrunt, would go and assist Stealth Elf, Pop Fizz, and Washbuckler fight another army of trolls. They weren't able to assist them, but they would instead help evacuate a Mabu town called Stone Town, as its dam was moments away from giving out, Tree Rex using a boulder to block a crack which allowed his companions to escape. And that's pretty much where his involvement in the story ends to my knowledge. But once again, I'm looking at the wiki and not the actual book. You know, if I got a nickel for every time Stealth Elf and Washbuckler fought an army of trolls together, I would have 2 nickels. I know it's not much, but it's kind of weird that it happened twice. But with that out the way, let's actually discuss his backstory. Now, in the second version of the story, it says that the soil was poisoned by both magic and tech waste, and the thing that interests me the most about this is how elements themselves can produce waste like that. The biography is probably talking about Quicksilver, since that's what the Archeans used in the past to bind magic elements to a machine, which kind of makes me think that the magic itself is taken out of the Quicksilver and whatever is left behind is dumped, but that's only speculation. I also wonder how he joined the Giants, because surprisingly, it doesn't say how or when he became a giant, even in both of his backstories. That's really weird considering the fact that he was the starter pack giant, most starter pack Skylanders having that part of their backstory explained. But for my personal headcanon, I believe that he was the second giant and that he and Ingenie decided to team up to wreck the Archeans, and the other giants joined them along the way. All in all, I think Tree Rex's backstory is pretty alright, and I'm pretty surprised with the amount of appearances he makes throughout Skylands. So with that out of the way, let's get on to the next Skylander of today.
The perfect swarm!
Now, when it comes to Skylanders and their designs, I think that Bumble Blast is the one that throws me for a loop the most, mostly because his mouth is an actual beehive or something similar, and surprisingly enough, he has a really interesting concept history when it comes to his development. Apparently, he went through a multitude of concept arts, which included one where he was covered in vines, one where he had a honeycomb chest and claws, which might have been inspired by a honey badger, but that's only speculation. Another one where he had 4 arms bursting out of a flower pot and wielded a honeycomb staff or a pair of hatchets, and apparently, his bark was supposed to look more like birch than the oak one we got in game. Camman18 would have lost his mind if that happened, but with all of that said and done, let's take a quick look at his backstory and find out why his mouth is a beehive. Before Bumble Blast was even a Skylander, he used to be a whole freaking beehive in the Radiant Mountains, where for ages the bees there would make the sweetest and most magical honey in all of Skylands. And because of this, the mountains would catch the attention of Chaos. After Chaos learned about this quote-unquote super honey, he would want to have it all to himself, so he would gather an army of his minions and launch an attack on the mountains. But when they arrived, they would be met by Bumble Blast. Bumble Blast was brought to life by the bees' magical honey beforehand, and he saw himself as not only their home, but also their protector, so he would valiantly battle the evil minions using the magical honey, and along with his bees, every intruder would feel a valiant sting and be sent fleeing. After this event, he would take his bees away from the mountains and roam Skylands with them, becoming a protector of nature, where he would soon join the Skylanders afterwards. Now, I know it was pretty confusing when he all of a sudden became a moving beehive, but the story doesn't really explain if he was alive or at least mobile before Chaos knew about them or after he learned about them. Maybe it's just me being an idiot again and not realizing it, but I don't know. The one thing that could confirm this is kind of vague. This also makes me wonder why he's mostly a tree instead of being just the hive. Yes, I know it's really likely that the magic brought the tree itself as well as the beehive to life, but it's the smallest part of his design and it feels like he's more of the tree than the beehive. And as much as I'm complaining about it, I actually think Bumble Blast has a solid design. Another thing I want to ask is, did he leave the other bees in the mountains behind, or was he the only hive up there? Because if that's the case, it's kind of insane that Chaos sent an entire army to attack a single hive worth of bees. But hey, Chaos has done far more for far less. But with that out the way, let's get to the final Skylander of today.
Drop the hammer.
Stump Smash is a core Skylander that made his first appearance in Spyro's adventure, and surprisingly, I don't really have that much to say about him at the moment. His design is pretty much his name, and the only question I have is why his bark is green. But with that out the way, let's take a look at his backstory and see what's going on here. Stump Smash was originally a magical tree in a wondrous woodland, where he would spend most of his time peacefully napping. But one day, he would awake to see his entire forest destroyed. Every tree, shrub, and even sapling around him was cut down, and even he wasn't safe from this either, as he had been cut down as well, leaving only a stump for a body and 2 mallet-shaped stumps for arms. In an absolute fury, he would fully uproot himself and stomped his way towards the lumberjack trolls responsible for his logging, lifting his arms up and slamming them together with a whack, which was apparently so strong, loud, and terrifying that the trolls immediately ran away from them, screaming their lungs out as they fled. The mallet slam was so strong that even Eon heard the damn things and went over to investigate, and after he learned about Stump Smash's story, he would bring him on board as a Skylander. But surprisingly, if the wiki is correct on the placement of these stories, he actually has his own story before Spyro's adventures, so let's take a quick look at that. When Eon was kidnapped by Squirm Grub, he would be the Skylander to calm Spyro down and stop him from grilling another character by the name of Wiggleworth. Figuratively, not literally. And at that moment, the giggling forest began to cry, which is something that it's not supposed to do, so Spyro assigns Stump Smash, Wrecking Ball, and Countdown along with Flameslinger to investigate. When they arrive, they would figure out that most of the giggling trees were turned to stone by a rampaging Bone Dragon, who was woken up by Chaos and his army. The Bone Dragon would then turn his attention to the Skylanders and begin to attack them, along with a half-petrified Glumpshanks. The dragon would nearly turn them into stone, but Wrecking Ball's belch was so rank that the dragon couldn't take it and fled, and while they had the time, they would signal for help, which would eventually reach Lightning Rod. The team would then go on a side quest and invade a troll bastion to find and rescue Eon, where they would find a petrified Chaos that Stump Smash almost destroys, only to remember Spyro's words about never abandoning or finishing off their foes, and deciding to take Chaos with them so they can unfreeze them. They would take the statues back to the Giggling Forest, only to find that most of the Skylanders were frozen by the dragon before the team manages to bring it out of the sky and get it to unfreeze everyone present. And Chaos would immediately try to attack everyone there as he was gunning for the life fragment of the Mask of Power, which is the dragon if I'm reading this correctly, but he was quickly driven away by Eon and his magic. I think that it's wild that Stump Smash was literally holding Chaos's life in his hands and actually contemplated on killing him. And as much as I want to dig more into him, I think that I ran out of time, so for now, thank you for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow as a channel, leave some comments down below to make the algorithm happy, and I will see you all in the next one.